In this video, we will look at the relationship between the concept of crystal and lattice. We usually write crystal is equal to lattice plus motif. So the relationship between crystal and lattice is expressed with help of another concept called motif, which is a very important concept in crystallography. We have defined lattice as a translationally periodic arrangement of points in a space, and a crystal is defined as translationally periodic arrangement of atoms in a space. So you can see the two definitions are very similar. Both are translationally periodic arrangement, but crystal is arrangement of atoms, lattice is arrangement of points. So there is this subtle and important difference between the two concepts. Failure to recognize this difference is widespread in literature on crystallography, in textbooks, as well as on web. So we have to be very careful to avoid this confusion and use the correct phrase in correct context. So let us look at what is the relationship between these two terms. We said crystal is equal to lattice plus motif. So essentially, every crystal is associated with a lattice. Since crystal is periodic arrangement of atoms, we can associate a set of points, a set of periodic points which has the same periodicity as that of crystal. That set of point is called lattice. But then lattice being only set of points is not actually crystal. So if we want to develop our crystal starting from its lattice, we have to associate with each point of the lattice an atom or a group of atoms. This atom or group of atom is called a motif. So lattice tells how to repeat, whereas motif tells what to repeat. Let us look at this with help of this example. We have a periodic arrangement of hearts. I am calling it a heart pattern. So this is something like a crystal, a periodic arrangement of atoms. Instead, in this two-dimensional example, we have periodic pattern of hearts. Now, if I look at the centers of each heart, then I have these centers are also distributed periodically, and we will have a periodic arrangement of points. This periodic arrangement of points is the lattice of the heart. It's the lattice of the heart pattern. I have called it heartless lattice because lattice doesn't have those hearts. Hearts have vanished, and only the periodicity or only the repeat pattern of the hearts is left or is intact in this lattice. So this is the lattice of heart pattern. How do I get back my original pattern? Well, I associate one heart with each lattice point. So when I say plus one heart, it's not that I have only one heart for this entire lattice. I have one heart for each lattice point. And if I place one heart at each lattice point identically, I get the pattern of heart back. So you can see the meaning of this lattice plus motif is equal to crystal. The heartless lattice plus the heart motif is the heart pattern. Let's look at a little bit more interesting example. In this case, an example of Escher pattern. Here you can see three different kinds of animals in three different colors: fishes, bats, and lizards. And you can also see, if you carefully look at the pattern, that this is a periodic pattern. Things are repeating. Lizards are repeating at certain intervals, and so are fishes and bats. So, how do I get the lattice of this pattern? So, I start with a particular point, which is a reference point. So, I have taken a reference point which is where the three fishes are meeting head on. So if that is my reference point, then I will look for identical points in the pattern which have the same arrangement and same orientation. So that will be other points in the pattern where three fishes are meeting head on. So if I now look at the collection of these points, then this collection of points will be the lattice of this pattern. Suppose I started with a different reference point. So you can see that if my reference point is not where three fishes are meeting head on, but three lizards are meeting head on, I can get this lattice simply by shifting the original lattice. So irrespective of my starting reference point, the lattice of a given pattern is unique. If I select different reference points, I simply get the same lattice shifted with respect to each other. Yet another point went where three bats are meeting head on. And if I remove the pattern, I am left with the lattice of the pattern. So every periodic pattern, and a crystal is a periodic pattern of atoms, has a unique lattice associated with it. Let us look at a little bit more realistic example, but is still a two-dimensional example, and that of graphene. So in the graphene pattern, this is the arrangement of atoms, the carbon atoms in graphene. You can see this is the well-known hexagonal pattern of carbon atoms, which gives you a sheet of graphene. This is a two-dimensional crystal, and so it will have a two-dimensional lattice. Let me try to find out the two-dimensional lattice starting with one reference point. So let me think of this carbon atom, the center of this carbon atom, as the reference point. Now I wish to look at all other equivalent carbon atoms. Rather surprisingly, all carbon atoms are not translationally equivalent, are not equivalent in the sense of a lattice. Because if you look at two nearby carbon atoms, so for example, this is my reference point. So if I go to the nearby carbon atom, that's that one. If I go from this carbon atom horizontally by this distance, I come to the center of this hexagon where there is no carbon atom. If I go horizontally in the same direction by same distance from this nearby carbon atom, I do find another carbon atom at the same distance in the same direction. So you can see that the neighborhood of this point, which is marked as a reference point, and neighborhood of a neighboring point is different. So the nearest neighbors are actually different in the lattice sense. It's the next nearest neighbor which is exactly identical to my given reference point. So it's only the alternate carbon atoms which form the lattice of graphene. And if I switch off the carbon atoms, if I remove the carbon atoms, I'm left with the lattice of graphene. If I want to get back my graphene from this skeleton, from this lattice, then I have to start placing carbon atoms on these lattice points. But if I place only one carbon atom on the lattice point, I have not got back my graphene. because I have got only half the atoms. Remember, there were atoms which were not at the lattice point. So what will I have to do is to place two atom motif, a pair of atom motif at each lattice point. So I'll have to place a carbon atom at the lattice point as well as another carbon atom shifted with respect to the lattice point at this particular location. So we have to exactly specify that location in terms of either the vector displacement from the reference point or in terms of coordinates. Now, if I place identical pairs at each lattice point, then I start creating my graphene structure. So I do get the full graphene structure by adding a pair of carbon atoms to each lattice point. So the description of motif requires an atom or a group of atoms associated with each lattice point, and to describe that you have to tell how many number of atoms are associated with each lattice point. It can be one, or as you saw in the case of graphene, it can be more than one. The chemical identity of atoms. In the case of graphene, there were two atoms per lattice point, but both atoms were of the same type. We will see examples later in this course where there can be different kinds of atoms associated with each lattice point. And then the precise location of the atoms also has to be given. This precise location is usually given in terms of displacement coordinates with respect to the lattice point in the crystal coordinate system. We will describe this aspect in more detail with examples in a later video. Thank you.